Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we are unpacking something truly fascinating: the dual sided economic role of the government. Often when we model the economy in our heads, we picture this very straightforward exchange, right? We see private businesses manufacturing and selling products, and people like you and me choosing to buy them. But there is a massive behemoth operating both in the background and the foreground of that exchange. The government is an incredibly powerful player that sits right in the middle of it all. It acts not just as an abstract rulemaker, but it actively participates in the marketplace in these massive, highly structural ways that we might not even realize on a daily basis. So today we're going to break down exactly how this entity operates, scaling all the way from its high-level regulatory oversight down to its boots-on-the-ground physical production. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is a quick roadmap of where we're headed. We'll start with the basic economic entities, move on to the government as the ultimate regulator, then explore its roles as both a consumer and a producer. After that, we'll nail down its 6 specific roles, and finally, look at how this all ties into maximizing our social welfare. All right, Section 1, the basic economic entities. To truly understand where the government fits into this giant macroeconomic machine, we kind of need to set the broader stage first. The entire economy is, at its core, this complex web of independent actors. An economic entity is formally defined as any institutional unit capable of executing economic activities completely on its own. And this structural definition, it's absolutely vital. By isolating these units, by looking specifically at how they acquire assets, how they take on liabilities, and how they make their own distinct transactions, we can accurately model how the broader economic engine actually functions, without getting totally lost in the noise of millions of individual daily trades. Now, while there are billions of participants globally, they actually group systematically into just 4 major buckets. First up, we have consumers or households, whose primary economic motivation is to maximize their own personal satisfaction. Second, we have firms or producers who exist purely to maximize profit. Naturally, this immediately creates a dynamic tension in the market, right? Buyers want the highest value, sellers want the highest margin. Then you have the foreign sector, dealing with all the cross-border transactions and trade, and finally, sitting in the third slot, constantly managing that tension between the other 3, is the government. Let's move to Section 2, Government, the ultimate regulator. Now, what's really interesting here is that the government isn't just another player participating in the game, it's literally the referee that writes the rule book. The fundamental definition in our source material makes this clear. The term government encompasses all regulatory bodies used to exercise control over how households and firms behave. In practice, this means setting the operational boundaries for the entire system. We're talking about establishing antitrust laws to prevent monopolies from crushing competition, setting environmental regulations that dictate how firms can produce goods, and enforcing consumer protection laws so households aren't exploited. It essentially shapes a stable, predictable environment so the other entities can safely transact. But as we'll see, this regulatory oversight is really only the tip of the iceberg. Which brings us to Section 3, the government as a consumer. If we pivot to the government's role as a direct market participant, we see the first half of a highly surprising dual identity. It actually acts as a massive consumer. It incurs immense consumption expenditure on a daily basis. Just think about national defense for a second. The government is buying boots, uniforms, and equipment directly from private firms. But crucially, its consumption goes way beyond physical items. It funds what economists call collective consumption. You see, a private firm isn't going to find it profitable to sell street lighting to a neighborhood because you can't exactly charge people just for looking at the light, right? Because the free market won't adequately provide these kinds of non-excludable goods, the government steps in to buy them for us. It funds police services for collective safety and medical care for public health. This matters immensely to your daily life because this collective consumption forms the very baseline of societal stability. Section 4, the government as a producer. So it consumes resources heavily, but who builds the physical foundations that our private firms and households rely on every single day? Well, the government also acts as a heavy-hitting producer. Through massive investment expenditure, it drives long-term capital formation. We're talking about constructing the physical backbone of the economy here, engineering massive suspension bridges, paving endless miles of roads, pouring concrete for dams, and establishing national power stations. Think about the ripple effect of this. When the government acts as a producer to build a new highway, it drastically reduces transportation costs for private firms, which in turn actually lowers retail prices for households. Its public production directly fuels the private success of all the other economic entities.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how unprecedented this dual capacity really is. We are ultimately looking at a single entity that functions simultaneously as the market's largest household and its largest firm. It pays for consumer goods and services, like defense supplies and public health initiatives, out of its operating budget, just like you would buy groceries or pay for insurance. But at the exact same time, it's pouring massive amounts of capital into long-term infrastructure assets, behaving exactly like a multinational corporation expanding its manufacturing base. This dual engine, driving both immediate consumption and long-term capital formation, is what makes the government an unmatched force in shaping our economic outcomes. Let's look at Section 5, the 6 roles of the government.
So, consolidating all these textbook concepts together, the government's toolkit as an active economic agent breaks down into 6 specific, clearly defined activities. First, it supplies public goods, making sure we have access to parks, roads, and bridges that keep society moving. Second and third, it deploys immense capital, both by incurring short-term consumption expenditure for immediate needs like defense goods, and by making long-term investment expenditure to drive that capital formation we just talked about. Fourth, and this is absolutely vital, it regulates the total supply of money. That's a power that directly dictates inflation rates and the cost of borrowing for every other entity out there. Fifth, it frames the macro environment through complex economic policies, meaning it adjusts tax rates, negotiates trade agreements, and sets industrial policies that shape business incentives. And sixth, it guarantees a baseline of human capital by providing primary health and educational facilities to the public.
Finally, Section 6, maximizing our social welfare.
Let's see how this all builds up to a final purpose. Why does the government undertake all these incredibly complex roles? Well, remember that dynamic tension we discussed back at the beginning? Households are trying to maximize their personal satisfaction. Private firms exist to maximize their profit margins. But the government, it operates on a fundamentally different incentive structure. Its defining aim is to provide maximum social welfare. It steps in to build the bridge that a private toll company wouldn't find profitable, or to fund the primary school that ensures the next generation is highly literate. Whether it's facilitating collective consumption like streetlights or investing in a massive hydroelectric dam, its ultimate objective isn't a financial return on investment. No, it's the overall well-being, stability, and advancement of society as a whole. So the next time you pay a tax, drive across a public bridge, or read about a sudden shift in trade policy, I want you to view it through this structured economic lens. The government is constantly having to balance its distinct identities. It acts as a strict referee writing the regulations, a massive consumer buying public services, and a heavy-duty producer pouring concrete for our infrastructure. By continually juggling these massive, sometimes competing roles, how effectively is the government actually maximizing that social welfare in your own daily life? That's the real question. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gives you a completely new perspective on the invisible economic machinery operating all around you. Keep analyzing and keep learning.